いいですよ。プレイヤーとして。1月それはなんかロボットで簡単でやってた人が、なんか営業の法人の営業推進に移って、もともとみんな知ってたんで知ってるんですけど、正規にこう下からやってた人がそのまま法人に入ったんで。
Okay, so yeah, please start your presentations about smart contracts.
Okay, great. If you want, you could turn your video off, and it might make the transmission a little bit better.
Okay.
Yeah, there. Okay. So I'm gonna screen share, and just tell me if you can see my slides. Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
Give me one second.
Okay.
1 second. Okay, do you see my slide now?
Now I can't see your slides.
The video of me?
Yeah, I just only see you. Your face.
Okay,
It's
just a
not
second.
disconnect. Yeah.
You still no slides?
Yeah, no slides.
Still just video?
Yes.
Okay. Let's see.
Yeah, I can see your
Okay,
slides.
okay, great. Okay, great. Give me 1 more seconds. Okay, now take up the whole screen.
Yes.
Okay, great. I'm gonna start.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So my name is Bill Marino. I'm an attorney. I'm a member of the New York Bar. I'm also a computer science student at Cornell Tech, which is the new New York City campus of Cornell. And there I do research on smart contracts for the Initiative for Cryptocurrencies and Contracts. That is a partnership between professors at Cornell, Cornell Tech, University of Maryland, and Berkeley. So everything I talk about today, unless I indicate otherwise, it will reflect US law. And I don't know anything about Japanese law, but if there's things that you guys can, if you can educate me a little bit, maybe at the end of the talk, I'd love to hear about Japanese law a little bit. But I'll be talking about US law, unless I say otherwise. Okay, so what I'd like to start with is the definition of contract. So at law, contract has a very specific meaning. And here is the definition from the Cornell Legal Information Institute. A contract is an agreement creating obligations enforceable by law. On the other hand, smart contract, as you guys may have noticed, is being defined in many ways. And some of these are compatible with the legal definition. So, for example, I really like this definition from Nick Zalo, who spoke at DevCon, right? And he's considered one of the godfathers of smart contracts. And here was his definition, which again is compatible with the legal definition of contract. A smart contract is a computerized transaction protocol that executes the terms of the contract. On the other hand, you'll hear other definitions of smart contract that are much broader. So for example, here's one that's much broader from Eris. And they're another smart contract, blockchain platform that you guys may have heard about. And here's their definition of smart contract. Smart contracts are modular, repeatable, autonomous scripts which can be used to build applications for yourself, the community, for clients, for quality, or even just for fun. So you can see that's much broader, and it's beyond the definition of contract that we saw at law. And then lastly, there's Ethereum. And I understand you guys have been working a lot with Ethereum, and one thing that you may have noticed is that in Ethereum, people call pretty much everything a contract or a smart contract. This is actually something that I'm working with a blog post about with Consensus. So let me give you a couple examples. If you've ever been to the Ethereum.org splash page, you might notice that the sample contract, the first sample contract that you see there is Hello World contract. So you can see that that is far outside the definition at law of contract that we saw. Another example is if you go to the Solidity documentation, the first contract you see there is called simple storage, and all it does is let you set the integers. So again, it's far outside that legal definition. I think that the reason people on Ethereum use the word contract so liberally, and we use it for things that are not contracts and are instead more like applications or processes, is because early in the days of Ethereum, they made the decision to call Ethereum's core building block, which is that contract that lives on the blockchain and has its own balance and account. They decided to call it a contract. And if you actually look at the white paper, you'll see that they made this decision to call that object a contract. See if you look at the second sentence. In general, there are two types of accounts: permanently owned accounts controlled by private keys, and contract accounts controlled by the contract code. So I think calling this Lego block or building block a contract has contributed to the scenario where people on Ethereum use the word contract or use the word smart contract to refer to everything, even if it's totally divorced from its definition at law. Okay, so you might be asking yourself, why does any of this matter? Why do we care what is called a contract or a smart contract? And the reason is this: if you have something that you intend to be a contract, that is to say you intend to be legally enforceable by a court as well as by code, then you want to put people on notice of that, and that includes your engineers or whoever's coding the contract. And why do they need to be put on notice? The reason is that U.S. courts seem open to enforcing digital contracts. No court that I'm aware of has dealt with the enforcement of a smart contract specifically, but U.S. courts seem to generally uphold digital contracts, things like click-wrap agreements over email, etc. There's a Fourth Circuit case from 2013, Metropolitan Regional, and that upholds a click-wrap agreement. I also, in the meetup page, I posted this GitHub link right here, and this is a place where I'm compiling a lot of smart contract law. So I would definitely, if you have a chance, it's a little messy right now, but maybe next week if you have any other questions about this stuff, like definitely check out that GitHub page. Again, I dropped the link into the meetup comments. So besides these court cases, there's also some laws that suggest digital contracts will be upheld and will be enforced in courts. There's the e-Sign Act, that's a federal act mandating that a contract relating to transactions involving or affecting interstate commerce may not be denied legal effect, validity, or enforceability solely because an electronic signature or electronic record was used in its formation. That's a federal act. And then on a state level, there are 47 states that have adopted the Uniform Electronic Transactions Act. And that states that a contract may not be denied legal effect or enforceability solely because an electronic record was used in its formation. So the point there is that there's a good chance that smart contracts will be upheld as contracts at law in court. But why do we care about this? Isn't the whole idea that smart contracts enforce themselves? I think the answer is yes, but sometimes the code is going to misfire. I'll show you an example later on of some code, some smart contracts, code on Ethereum that has misfired. And when that happens, you might want to have the backup of going to court. On a more practical level, habits die hard, and as we try to bring more serious players onto Ethereum, whether they're banks or Fortune 500 companies, they will probably still want the ability to go into court and enforce a smart contract if something goes wrong. So let's suppose that you agree with me and you want your smart contract to also be enforceable at law. Well, now what? Well, if you dig deeper into all those cases I was just talking about, you'll see that to reap the benefits of enforcement under those cases and those laws I mentioned, your digital contract also has to be a contract at law. That means that it has to contain the elements of a contract at law. What are the elements of a contract at law? Again, this might be very different in Japan, and I'm curious to hear if you guys know anything about Japanese contract law and what the elements of a contract are there. But at least in the US, the elements of a contract are these, and I'm going to break this down a little bit. The formation of a contract requires a bargain in which there is a manifestation of mutual assent to the exchange and consideration. So let's break that down a little bit. What is a bargain? A bargain is an agreement to exchange promises, to exchange performances, or to exchange a promise for performance. All of this, by the way, comes from the Restatement of Contracts, which is a reference book that we use a lot here in the US for contracts. The second element I talked about there was the manifestation of mutual assent. That requires that each party either make a promise or begin or render a performance. Let's break that down a little bit. It can be written, spoken, it can be by act, or even omission. So what matters when it comes to mutual assent is the subjective outward appearance of it. And all parties have to believe that it's final. In their minds, it has to be final. So one thing to start thinking about is when we have smart contracts and we want them to behave like real contracts or contracts at law, how are we going to manifest assent? How are we going to show that the parties are assenting to this agreement? Do we do it in the code? Does the code tell the story on its own? Or do the actions of the party, for example, calling functions or sending money, sending transactions in the contract, does that do it? Do we want to have some kind of online text store that echoes what is happening in the code? And if so, where can we do that? I know that Swarm and IPFS have been talked about as places where we might be able to store things like that on Ethereum. I'm not aware that anyone's actively using them yet, or that they're finished products. Another option is to store things completely offline and maybe you reference them with a string on a smart contract. And then lastly, you could just have offline verbal agreements. And the question then I think is, are we losing the benefits of a smart contract if we're showing our assent completely offline? It's worth pointing out that assent usually takes the form of an offer or proposal by one party followed by an acceptance by the other party or parties. So if you've dug it all into US contract law, you've probably heard this notion of there being an offer and an acceptance, and those being sort of the building blocks of the contract. So how does that map onto smart contracts? Let's break it down a little bit more. An offer is the manifestation of willingness to enter into a bargain, so may as to justify another person understanding that his assent to that bargain is invited and will conclude it. So that's the definition of an offer. And then let's look at the definition of an acceptance. And again, these are the building blocks. Acceptance of an offer is a manifestation of assent to the terms thereof, made by the offeree in a manner invited or required by the offerer. So one thing to think about is how does offer and acceptance, these building blocks of contracts, how do they map onto Ethereum? Does the offerer issue a smart contract to the blockchain, and then the person who wants to accept it maybe calls a function in it or sends some money into it, and that's how they signal their acceptance? So these are the kinds of things that are good to set forth. Also, if someone needs to accept it, you can also make a counteroffer. That represents a rejection and a substituted offer. But again, the question is, if someone makes me an offer, perhaps by putting up smart contracts on the blockchain, counteroffer, do I issue my own new smart contracts? And if so, what happens to the old one? To the blockchain, or is there, and do we have to make sure we turn it off, and so forth? Thing that happens during the offer and acceptance process is that the offerer may decide he wants to terminate for acceptance. You can do that up until the time of acceptance. So again, the question is, what happens to the termination do you take steps to, turn it off? And we're going to talk about those kind of steps later on. And does it sit there in a blockchain forever, bloating the blockchain? These are things we all need to think about. The final element of a contract at law is what's called consideration. And it's, I'll give you the definition first, and then I'll kind of tell it to you in layman's terms. The formal definition is an act or forbearance, or the creation, modification, or destruction of a legal relation or a return promise, bargained for and given in exchange for the promise. In layman's terms, what that means is that you have, and that is why a promise to make a gift, at least in U.S. law, it lacks consideration. It can be binding other ways, like an equity, but at least that in law it's not binding.
No, Bill-san, yeah.
So,
currently we can see your slides. Is it correct status?
can you hear me?
Currently we can't see your slides of presentation.
You cannot see them?
Yes. Currently we just
So do you see the,
your face, yeah. Currently we are seeing. Yes.
well, so you mean that you would rather see my face than the slides?
Oh, yeah, yes.
Okay, let's do that, hold on.
Yeah.
Okay, give me 1 second. Okay, do you see me now?
No, I can't. We can't see your slides. Yeah.
Can you share your desk?
Oh, okay, you
Yes.
cannot see the slide.
Yes.
You want to see the slides?
Yes.
Okay. So hold on, let's try it again. That's strange. Okay, tell me if you see them now.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, now we can see it. Yeah.
Okay, that's strange. I don't know why they went away. Okay.
Oops.
No, I'm sorry.
No. Now, yeah. Back to your face.
Okay, I see. So give me 1 second. Did you not see them for the whole presentation?
Oh, yes. Yeah. We only see
Okay,
your
now you
face.
see.
Yeah.
1 second.
Maybe you have to download it from the,
Now what do you see?
Yeah, it's, but it's after you clicking the
See, it's
present button, so we can see your face.
So what do you see now?
Now we can see the web browser of the Joix.
Okay, so what happens is when I have to keep it on the browser because if I click present, then it seems like you guys
Yes.
Yeah.
don't see my slides anymore.
Yeah.
So I'll keep it on the browser.
Yeah. So if
Can you see it though?
yeah. Could you back to the first page? Yeah. If possible, yeah. Yeah, because
So
yeah. Can you start from the beginning?
I can't go just because my time.
Oh yeah. Okay. So
Um,
it's.
Oh, it's here.
Yeah,
Here we go.
could
Where we are.
you share the after the this presentation
So,
is
but
difficult.
do you see the
Yeah.
slide right now?
Yeah.
You can see the slide.
Yes.
Okay, great. So, I'll find a way. I'll send you guys the slides over the email or something like that.
Oh, great. Yeah, we will share it. So, yeah, YouTube.
So, where I was talking about this last element of a contract, which is called consideration. Go back. Okay. So consideration is essentially the notion that a party has to give up something for the other party's promise, right? And that's why a gift lacks consideration and it's not binding. So we don't enforce that in U.S. law. So something to think about is how do you achieve this on a smart contract platform? Do the parties pay deposits into a contract, and that is how they implement consideration? So that's the last element of contract law. It's something to think about. So those are all the elements of a contract. And if you can hit all of those elements, then you something that's not just a smart contract, but is also a contract at law. So what happens next? Well, you're in a pretty good spot, right? Because in theory, your code prevents a breach of the contract. That is the whole purpose of a smart contract, right? It's to prevent the breach, which by the way is defined as a material failure to render or to offer performance. You can also code it to provide an automatic remedy in the case of breach, which is a really nice feature. On top of that, if you've hit all of those elements and you've created a contract at law, you also have the backstop of enforcing your agreement in court. So that's really nice. So what's something that can go wrong? Well, for one thing, you might decide that you want to undo or alter the contract. This is something actually that I've done a lot of research on for a professor here at Cornell Tech. And at law, people will decide that they want to undo or alter their contracts all the time. And as a result, the law has a bunch of tools for doing that. But the problem is those tools don't necessarily work very well for smart contracts, because smart contracts, unless you take a couple steps to change this, they are immutable, right? And they're unchangeable. I mean, what you put on the Ethereum blockchain is immutable, unless you take some steps to make sure that you can change it. So, at law, there are 3 ways that you can undo a contract. There's unilateral termination. That means that one party has a right to terminate the contract. That has to be a term in the contract in order for the right to exist. The parties can also agree to undo a contract. That's called rescission by agreement. Lastly, a court can order a rescission of a contract. That's only going to be granted by a court in a couple instances: fraud, false representations, unilateral mistake, duress, or infancy. How are you guys doing, by the way? Can you still see my slides?
Yes.
Okay, great. The question is, when you look at these 3 ways to undo contracts at law, how do they apply to smart contracts? Because as I said, at least on Ethereum, the blockchain is immutable, right? Once you contract there, you can never change it, you can never delete it. So there's at least 2 ways that I recommend everybody use at least one of these methods on every smart contract that they build. I think it's really important. And I'm not going to go into the details, but are you guys familiar with the suicide function in Ethereum?
No. Yeah.
Okay. So suicide is one way that Ethereum provides for you to undo your contract. You can also use modifiers and enums. And you can see I have a link there in the slide, and I also threw it into the meetup comments. And this contract, which was actually built on stage at Ethereum DevCon back in November, does a great job of using modifiers and enums as a way to turn off certain functions in the contract. You create states that you can turn on and off. And if you apply those to all of the functions in the contract, you create a way to turn off your entire contract. So I would definitely check out both of these things. It's really important. You never know what'll happen, so it's important to have a way to undo your contract in your code. And if you don't include that at the beginning, you can never go back and change that. There are also ways at law to alter the contract. That's unilateral modification. This is very rare. It would also have to be a term in the contract. The parties can agree to modify a contract. That's fine, but you have to have new consideration. Remember we talked about consideration. Lastly, a court can reform a contract. They can go in and they can alter the contract. This will only be granted in a couple of circumstances. Mutual mistake. That basically means when the contract has failed to distill the intentions of the parties in play. Fraud, or what's called unconscionability, which are terms born out of an absence of meaningful choice for one party and thus are unreasonably favorable to the other party. So note that all of these may be a greater danger with smart contracts, where code makes it easier to make mistakes, to defraud others, or push unconscionable terms. on those who don't know it as well. So we want to have ways to reform contracts. That law, you saw the 3 ways, but how do we do these for smart contracts? And here there are 2 tools that I tend to look at a lot, and they're not as, I don't think they're as necessary as the ones I described for undoing the contract. But if you think that you want to change your contract at some point down the line, again, you can use those modifiers and enums that I talked about, and then you can look at a great example of that in that link that I dropped into the meet. Yep. And those are a way to turn off individual functions, turn them on and off. So that's a way to modify a contract. And you could also, and then maybe send the balance of a present contract to it. So that's another option. Actually, I think that's one that Vitalik has highlighted as a way to alter contracts. So suppose you don't want to change things, but nonetheless, like something eventually goes wrong. How do you actually enforce a smart contract in courts? Well, the first question there is, what do you actually bring into court? You could go in with code, but you might also think about, if you create a smart contract, having something that echoes its terms, but is more easily read by a human, a traditional contract. You can bring into court and show, to a judge or a jury. It's because Ethereum is pseudonymous, right? You have your Ethereum address, but not much else. So I think it's kind of breaking through that signature, trying to get at the real information of the party. And this is a reason why it's really useful for some kind of treat that addresses to names and as parties who want that to seriously contract. A third question, if you ever have to take a smart contract into court, to think about is, again, what can the court really do? You heard me talk a couple of moments ago about the fact that smart contracts are immutable. So even if a court wants to alter contracts, does it have the code to enable that? And as you can imagine, I think there's going to be a big problem down the line, especially if people start building contracts that have copyright infringement or criminal things like an assassination contract, money laundering contract, maybe violating health data laws. Like, when people have these things in their contract, how are courts going to order those contracts undone? It's something we all need to be thinking about. We maybe even want to arrive at a point where we give courts some kind of keys or backdoors into contracts, something that definitely doesn't exist right now. So just as an example of a contract that actually did break, EtherPot is a lottery contract that was issued to the Ethereum blockchain. And it turned out that because of a coding error, the Ethereum lottery always awards every day's lottery prize to the first person who enters. So again, there's a coding error and it's broken, and the person who created it, they couldn't do much more than put up a little sign that says broken, like that, and then write a blog post about it. What they couldn't do is they couldn't take it off the blockchain, because once something is on Ethereum, it's there forever, and that's the address. Actually, it's still there on the blockchain. So that covers a lot of contract law issues, and what I'm going to do with the rest of I'm going to just talk about some specific legal issues that might touch on specific contracts that you create. So this depends on the type of contract that you're creating. Most of these things have not been addressed by courts with regards to contracts, so we have to look at analogous situation, like the internet or virtual currency cases. How are you guys doing? Can you still see my slides?
Yes.
Okay, great. So initial question here is what I would call meta question, which is, where are you subject to jurisdiction? So you have a smart contract and it's doing something, you know, where can you be sued for it, or where can you be prosecuted for it? In the US, when it comes to internet jurisdiction, at least, the majority of courts apply what's called the Zippo test. Okay, and that tries to determine the nature and the quality of commercial activity on an internet site to decide if a court in a certain forum has jurisdiction. So the Zippo test is a sliding scale, and one of the end of the spectrum are situations where a defendant clearly does business for the internet. As an example, if the defendant enters into contracts with residents of a foreign jurisdiction that involve the knowing and repeated transmission of computer files over the internet, personal jurisdiction is proper. On the other side of the sliding scale are situations where a defendant has simply posted information on an internet website which is accessible to users or
No.
っていうか電池がなんか切れそうじゃないですか。
あ、もう大丈夫です。
それそっちの問題なんですね。
あ、こっちなんですか。なんか向こう側のなんか
あれ向こう側のなんですか。
だったんじゃないですか。こっちですか。
ローバッテリー出てましたよね。
こうなって
ここで外とつなぎたいから大丈夫なのか
多分大丈夫。
こっちのでした。こうついてるの。
見えて。
ちょっと待ってますね。一回無理やり切ってみたら。
あ、Hello, we can't hear your voice. Currently.
Hello.
verbiage of it. Can you guys hear me okay still?
Oh, sorry. The battery is out. Yeah, please. About 100.
We lost you on Zippo.
Yeah, the jurisdiction issue. It's.
Okay. So your battery died at Zippo.
The other end of the sliding spectrum.
Okay, cool. So the point of Zippo is essentially that at least U.S. jurisdictions, they looked at a sliding scale test that tries to determine essentially how involved in business is a website and how interactive is it? Can you still hear me okay?
Oh yes.
Yeah?
Oh yes.
Okay, great. So I would say that there's things that the same sliding test would apply to some contracts, and it seems like smart contracts fall onto the side of the sliding scale that is the interactive side. And that would probably subject them to jurisdiction. All these things are undecided with regard to smart contracts, so we see how it ends up. After the Zippo test, I talked about foreign jurisdiction, and I gave a couple examples of foreign countries going after individuals in other countries because of their internet behavior. You guys missed all of that, right? It was the stuff about Australia and Germany?
That's right.
Okay. So, this is important, so I'll mention this because everyone should have this on their minds. So there are many instances of countries pursuing residents of other countries for posting things on the internet that were accessed in their own jurisdictions. So for example, Australia's High Court held in a defamation suit that a US-based magazine was subject to Australian jurisdiction because subscribers in Australia pay to access it using Australian credit cards. And then a German court ruled that Germany could prosecute an Australian man for running a website in Australia that questioned the Holocaust. So these are instances where a website is being created in one country, but then another country prosecutes or allows that person to be sued in their own country. So it would be interesting to see how this maps onto smart contracts, and if you create a smart contract in Japan and it does something harmful, I would say right now that there is a chance that you could be brought into court in these other countries, or that you could be prosecuted in these other countries. So we'll have to see how it pans out. So after that, I mentioned that another issue that affects many smart contracts is virtual currency licensing. So you guys can see my slides, right?
Yes.
Okay, great. So here in New York, we have a new virtual currency license. It's called BitLicense. It's $5,000. It's a $5,000 application fee. The larger cost is in the compliance costs, which are things like know your customer rules and anti-money laundering rules, which require you to essentially keep track of who is using your site and so forth. And that has proved very costly. Actually, you can see, I read that one company said it cost them about $100,000. So because most smart contracts rely on virtual currency, and certainly the ones on Ethereum do, this is something else to have on your radar, is the licensing of virtual currency. It's not clear yet really how it's going to affect smart contract platforms. And also what other countries are going to adopt virtual currency licenses. We have it in New York, and I think California is thinking about doing one. So the last thing I'm going to talk about is I'm going to just run through a couple other instances of types of contracts that might be subject to some kind of regulation, okay? Because courts have not dealt with this in the smart contract context, what I'm usually looking to is, have they dealt with it in a virtual currency context or in a Bitcoin context? I think that's like the closest thing at this point. So, for example, when it comes to a stock issuing contract, you can imagine creating a contract on Ethereum that issues some kind of stock tokens in exchange for investments. And the SEC has taken administrative action against a gentleman for issuing stock in his companies in exchange for Bitcoin over a now defunct Bitcoin stock exchange. So there is some indication that the SEC would be willing to regulate that kind of thing, a smart stock issuing contract. And actually, Overstock, who has a blockchain platform, whose name I cannot recall right now, but they actually filed what's called an S3, which is a general prospectus with the SEC, anticipating that they're going to be trying to issue public offerings of stock over the blockchain. That S3 became effective without any issue. In other words, the SEC didn't try to stop it. So it would be interesting to see what Overstock tries to do.
Excuse me?
There's also
No, I have a question.
No, yeah. Because
Please go back to the previous slide. Yes.
this one.
Yes. Can we see that, or sorry, is it public? Public?
Yeah, it's definitely
Can we see that document filed by Overstock?
Yeah, the document is definitely public. So if you look on the meetup page for this event, you'll see that I've linked to a GitHub. That is my GitHub where I'm throwing a lot of legal analysis of these issues. It's very messy right now, but if you search for the word Overstock, you will find the link to that document.
Thank you.
I can also send it. I'll post a link to that specific document on the meetup page when we are done today. Does that sound good?
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so the SEC has also gone after a couple other types of virtual currency behavior that I think smart contracts will try to embody at some point. For example, exchange, like a stock exchange type contract. The SEC took administrative action against an individual for operating two online venues that traded securities using the virtual currencies Bitcoin or Litecoin. There's also what you might call an investment pool contract, which is you might want to create a contract that would collect ether from investors and then maybe invest it and then return the investment plus interest. I'm not sure how you would design such a contract, but I can imagine that someone's trying to create one. And the SEC has taken action against a man who ran an unregistered, it was a Ponzi scheme basically like this, using Bitcoin. So it would be interesting to see how they would respond to a smart contract that did something similar. I guess the point of all these is that the SEC is certainly eyeing virtual currency as something that they can regulate in certain circumstances, and most smart contracts are certainly reliant on virtual currency, so there's a chance, I think, that the SEC, the Securities and Exchange Commission, will also try to regulate certain kinds of smart contracts. The last one of these is derivative contracts. So derivatives are contracts whose value is derived from the performance of an underlying asset. These are things like futures, forwards, swaps, options. These are a really natural fit for smart contracts. And I know that Hedgie is a company, for example, that is building, I think those are just Bitcoin blockchain based. So they're not Ethereum smart contracts, but I know people are also looking at Ethereum as a way to build derivatives. And again, SEC has regulated Bitcoin-based swaps a couple of times. And not just the SEC, but also the Commodity Futures Trading Commission. They focus just on futures, swaps, options, and they have also regulated a couple virtual currency swap platforms. So that pretty much covers everything I wanted to cover. It looks like I went a little bit over the time. If I had, my conclusion would be this: we're still waiting to hear from courts on a lot of these issues. in the meantime, I think it's the prudent thing to do is to be very cautious when you're developing, especially if you think you want to create things that are also contracts at law, and to think through the consequences of everything you're doing. You know, everything on Ethereum is permanent essentially, so you really want to think far into the future. And then lastly, I would really suggest that you always add the code to your smart contracts. I can also send you some links on how to do that. Let you undo the contract. That's really important because you never know what's going to happen. That is my Twitter address, by the way, and that's probably the best way to keep updated on what I'm up to. So that's pretty much everything I have prepared.
Yeah, thank you.
Let me turn the slide off, and then maybe you guys have some questions. Sorry, 1 second.
Yes, now switch back to the face.
You can see my face now?
Oh yeah.
Thank you for your
So, do you
presentation.
guys have any questions about anything, or?
I have one question. How do you think about the necessity of smart contract verification or checking by some authorities or government before or after activating that smart contract on some blockchain?
Tomaki, could you repeat the question? Or just on?
No,
How do you think about the necessity of the smart contract verification or checking by government or some authorities?
When you say verification, can you?
Before launching?
Before launching or after launching? Both cases. And in terms of the compliance and AML issue or something?
I'm not sure I understand the question. Maybe, let me think. Is there, maybe we can type it or something, just because I can't quite hear it. Or you can email it to me or something, or what's the best? I can't hear you.
例があるわけじゃないから想像できない。
今の質問。
その要するにスマートコントラクトのチェックとかベリフィケーションみたいなことを何かしらオーソリティとかがやる必要性っていうのが出てくる。
About the verification, is it necessary for the governments to do it or isn't?
Yeah, okay, so is it necessary for governments to verify? I'm just confused by the word verify there. Do you mean verify there? Is there another way that you can put it?
Yeah, maybe it's legally or and also the mathematically like formal verification or something. Yeah, both.
Probably formal verification is not a legal issue. So much more the compliance issue.
Okay. So maybe this is the question. Is it going to be necessary for governments to be like overseeing and keeping track of them? Is that sort of the question? Because that was what I was trying to during that last part of the talk, which is I think that the government is actually probably interested in following certain kind of smart contracts, at least that fall under the jurisdiction of certain regulatory bodies. They resemble futures or swaps or their investment style contracts. I certainly that has an interest in regulating something that's more just like computer code, like a hello world contract, terms of service, more like that. But when you have a contract that resembles security, then I think they're certainly in following that. Also, and maybe this is also kind of, when it comes to something like crime, right? That thing that at some point governments are going to have to deal with, and I don't know that they're going to be monitoring all smart things on Ethereum, like try to rebuild the Silk Road, the market sites that was shut down a year or two ago. So when those kinds of things happen, I think is going to have to think to shut these things down, because right now they're pretty much impossible to shut down. It's a distributed platform. It's a new. So I don't know if that answers your question. Did I cover it? Tamaraki, did I kind of answer the question?
Yeah, maybe it's question is difficult. So this one is kind of vague. Yeah. So.
Okay.
Yeah. I was if you have already mentioned so what is the ideal world for the SECs living with smart contracts? So what's the regulator think about smart contracts fit into the society?
Yeah, I mean, we haven't heard what regulators think about smart contracts yet. I think everyone's waiting for it, but we have heard about we've heard a little bit about what they think about virtual currency and Bitcoin, and it seems, based on those 5 or 6 cases that I showed you, that they are interested in regulating it, at least the SEC and the CFTC.
Regulated for what? What is the reason for them to regulate?
Sure. So let me go back to show you these cases, right? And I'll maybe I just didn't do a very good job explaining them. Give me 1 second. Again, just to be clear, there are no instances where smart contracts have been regulated, at least not where I'm aware of. Instances of the CFTC. Can you?
Yeah. Yes, now we can see you as well.
Okay, great. Okay. So, look at these arrays, if you see these italics, this means it was a real case that really happened. And this is the regulatory body called the CFTC, the Commodity Futures Trading Commission, and the action against someone for creating a platform where you could emulate what's called a swap. And a swap is a security, that you can trade on an exchange. So administrative action, actually twice. So there's 2 different cases here. SEC, in jurisdiction of the laws, has also gone after someone for that. The SEC for an investment pool type platform using Bitcoin, and or operating something that resembled a stock exchange using Bitcoin. Well, these are the closest things I think that indicate that there's a good chance that regulators will be in smart contracts, at least as of securities. There's something else or that I've seen they're willing to regulate, but I'm sure is
now, can you, say because, the connection is.
こっちの、テレビとマイクをテレビを切れば音が多分ビートが少ない。
Was there another question?
Question?
Yeah.
The example of the cases you've given so far, obviously, the courts were able to find the defendants. Aren't we living in a world now with a distributed platform where it's possible to launch an app that will live forever and not be able to be traced to a creator? What happened in those circumstances?
I think I heard the question, and it sounded like this in a position right now to create and issue things through blockchain that can never be tracked back to a person, right?
Right.
If it was doing something malicious, there's just no way to stop it, to take like prosecute one person for it. Is that the question?
That's right, a person or a party or.
Okay. I mean, that's one of the things I was kind of pointing out, and it's scary. The government at some point will have something to say about it, ask for some kind of backdoor or something, right? Because if focus of it's Silk Road. So the Silk Road was a
Yeah, we're familiar.
place. Okay, cool. So I think there, at a point, someone tries to build something on Ethereum that resembles Silk Road. And the government is going to find itself, whether it's the US government or other governments, they're not going to shouldn't do anything about it for the reasons you pointed out. And it'll be interesting to see if the government tries to work with platforms like Ethereum to have some kind of doors, be able to suicide contracts on their own. Really what happens. I think everyone is. And it's something that we probably should deal with now instead of not and having summits, right?
Thanks. And what on the other side, what are the most innocuous and also useful contracts that maybe are already flooding into the platform that take a lot of the load off the work of lawyers and notaries, etc.?
Sure. Well, off the bat, I would say I haven't really seen too much, but really, I think a lot of the real nice things that people have built for Ethereum fall into the category, and maybe not even smart contracts, and more like applications. That was something that I talked about at the beginning of the talk, which is there are a lot of things on Ethereum that we're calling contracts and smart contracts that are really just applications. Like Consensus, I do some stuff with Consensus, and they have like a boardroom application that resembles, mimics the functions of a boardroom where you can, have votes and you can elect new board members and so forth. I think that's a really cool contract. And they have a bunch of other great ones over at Consensus. A lot of them, though, are more like applications. I haven't seen people building, the link that I put in the meetup it's called an escrow contract, but really it's kind of like a sale.
now.
Can you hear me now?
Oh yes. Yeah, this is some error. It's authentication.
So real world use till now is a lot of it is escrow.
Say the word one more time. What was the word before escrow?
Real world use up till now, much of it is escrow from what you've seen.
I would just there's one contract called an escrow contract that I think more resembles like a sale contract, like an eBay style kind of sale agreement. So I don't know if I'd say people seem to be using it for escrow type things, although obviously that's a really great use case. Yeah, I don't know that I've seen a ton of that.
Have you seen like any ideal use cases you consider very appropriate?
Certainly, yeah. Like I just mentioned, something as simple as a rental agreement between two people, not on Airbnb, or a revolving loan agreement where a loan pays it, makes their payments every month. I think it's going to rely on really good oracles, and I'm not sure that those built. I think insurance contracts are going to be really interesting. Believe it or not, contracts. Although the one I showed you guys, Etherpot, is a broken lottery contract. I think that people will successfully build those kinds of contracts. So yeah, there's a lot of use cases. Just into my mind. Yeah.
How do you think about the dog sign? Yeah, in US, is a dog sign is maybe the 50 million users in US, and then most of the contract, is a digital sign is okay. But in Japan, really few, and it's legally not allowed to, not official digital sign.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, dog sign.
So something like Donkey Sign is not supported, not you mean?
I have seen some demos of the dog sign one. It's leasing the cars and then pay for the insurance. And it shows some demos using the blockchain. It's an interesting application.
I just would love to know more about it. Maybe you can send me some of the things that you're
Oh,
talking
yeah.
I'd love to see. Any other questions? Can you still hear me?
Oh yes, yeah, we can hear you.
Okay.
And
Well, I budgeted until 6 more minutes. So, we can just conclude now if you want. Unless there's some other last questions.
Maybe the last question is, do you think the future of the legal smart contracts? How do you think about rates, the percentage of the smart contracts is legally is admitted by the government? How many percentage? Do you think? Currently it's 0.
Well, I think there's a lot of work to do. I think we're a couple years couple years before really start replacing agreements, and part of that is that people are just so used to paper contract. So it will take a long time to get people used to the platform, and also it's going to take a long time for houses that I mentioned earlier. Things like making sure that you put in the code to do a contract or to alter. I think we have a couple more years of development. I mean, someday all of our contracts will be digital or automated in some fashion. I think that there'll be one of those two things for sure. That was one of the reasons that I went to the science after having been on Twitter, because I really believe that that is where things are headed. It's going to take the blockchain is always going to be the best solution. Like sometimes doing things more on the dot side of things that are a little bit more analog are better solutions. So I guess we'll find out.
Yeah. Okay, so you are optimistic about the legally smart contract future?
Can you say it one more time?
I optimistic about the legal smart contracts.
I'm very, very optimistic. However, I have work to do. And there's a lot of work to do, even just engineers working alongside lawyers. I'd like to see both communities work together more on these things.
Yeah.
Try to do is I try to bridge the divide. There's a lot of work, but we'll get there. Definitely, I'm very optimistic.
Great. Currently, the few people, you was a lawyer and an attorney, and then the computer science students is a real opportunity to thank you for giving us the presentation.
It's my pleasure, and I'm always here as a resource, so you guys can always email me with questions. And let's just keep the conversation going. Let's keep the relationship going. And if you have specific questions about things, don't be afraid to email me or reach out. We have to work together to solve these issues.
My suggestion is, are you using Skype? If you use Skype, is it possible to make a group? Maybe that kind of talk, discuss more. Okay.
Sure. Yeah. I have Skype. We can definitely do that.
Oh, great. Thank you. Currently here is the Sony office, and then some IP managed IP is a department, and also many ideas is legal operation will happen.
Gotcha. Yeah. Let's definitely set up.
Thank you.
Thank you guys so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks for letting me present, and look forward to talking to everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.